Let me start with something uncomfortable. Most narcissists don't get defeated in loud battles. They get destroyed in silence, and usually by someone who finally learns how to think differently. If you've ever wondered why a narcissist suddenly panics, spirals, or turns hostile for no obvious reason, there are reasons, and today I'll show you the 5 signals that you're quietly dismantling their ego from the inside out. Before I break this down, if clarity and emotional intelligence matter to you, stick around to the end. It'll change the way you deal with manipulative personalities permanently. The first sign, emotional detachment, is far more powerful than most people realize because it attacks the exact structure a narcissist depends on to feel in control. A narcissist operates like a system that constantly scans for emotional data. Your reactions, your tone, your fear, your excitement, your disappointments, your hopes. Every expression you make gives them information they can weaponize. They use it to predict you, influence you, or destabilize you. When you detach emotionally, you cut off that data stream. It's like shutting down every sensor they rely on. They can no longer read you. They can't anticipate how you will respond. They can't manipulate you through guilt, pressure, or drama in the same way. Your calm presence becomes a form of resistance because it forces them to interact with a version of you they cannot decode. They feel like they've lost their grip, and this terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about yourself or become numb. It means you stop feeding their ego with your reactions. When you no longer argue over the small provocations they throw at you, they feel a sense of failure. When you no longer collapse when they withdraw affection, they sense a loss of power. When you don't get pulled into emotional traps designed to trigger insecurity, they realize the old tactics don't work anymore. Narcissists fundamentally depend on emotional predictability. They need you to be reactive because reactivity gives them leverage. The moment you shift into a place of neutrality, you disrupt the very mechanism that keeps them in control. The silence inside you is what unnerves them. You're not yelling, not crying, not defending, not seeking validation, not chasing closure. This silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back their own emptiness. They start questioning what changed in you. They start worrying about losing their influence. They may escalate temporarily because your detachment exposes a truth they don't want to face. Their power was always borrowed, never owned. And when the source stops giving, the structure collapses. What a narcissist fears most is emotional starvation. Your detachment signals that you no longer believe their narrative. It shows that you've stepped out of their psychological maze and now see the walls clearly. You aren't reacting to their highs or lows. You aren't buying their charm or their cruelty. You've switched from emotional to logical thinking, and that alone shifts the dynamic in your favor. This kind of detachment is a quiet revolution. It doesn't require confrontation or dramatic exits. It simply requires awareness and control over your own responses. You are no longer a source of fuel for them. You are no longer an emotional puppet. And while they might fight harder for a moment, their long-term collapse begins the moment you refuse to play the emotional game. The second sign, the moment your boundaries become non-negotiable, sends a shockwave through a narcissist's entire psychological system because it challenges the very foundation of how they maintain control. Narcissists thrive in environments where rules are flexible, where lines can be crossed, and where your no can be pushed, softened, or manipulated into a maybe. The more they can blur your limits, the more power they feel they have over you. Boundaries are the one thing they cannot comfortably coexist with because boundaries require mutual respect, and respect is something they weaponize, not something they offer. When you start enforcing boundaries with consistency, something shifts. You're no longer participating in their emotional negotiations. You're not arguing each time you say no. You're not explaining why you won't tolerate certain behaviors. You're not pleading for them to understand. You're simply stating what is acceptable and what is not, without emotional leakage. This calm firmness destabilizes them because it interrupts their usual tactics. They can't guilt you, they can't confuse you, and they can't overwhelm you with intensity if you're no longer reacting the way you used to. You've changed the rules of engagement, and that makes them feel out of control. A narcissist expects your boundaries to collapse under pressure. That's why they test them. They will try charm or guilt, anger or silence, promises or threats, anything that can get you to bend. But the moment you remain firm, something critical happens. They realize their influence is shrinking. For someone whose identity depends on dominance, this is intolerable. They will see your boundary as a personal attack rather than a healthy standard, because to them, your independence threatens their superiority. Consistent boundaries force them to confront a reality they avoid at all costs. They don't own you. They don't dictate your emotional state. They don't control the pace of the relationship. This realization is deeply destabilizing for them. They start to recognize that the dynamic is shifting in your favor, even if you're not trying to win. You're simply protecting your peace, but to them, it feels like rebellion. Your boundaries act like a firewall, blocking the manipulative strategies they depend on. Without the ability to invade your space, emotionally, mentally, or physically, they can't maintain the illusion of authority. What used to work no longer does. You're no longer available for exploitation. You're no longer accessible for emotional extraction. You've become someone they can't easily penetrate or predict. This terrifies them because control is their oxygen. When you remove their ability to cross your lines, you cut off the air supply. They feel powerless, irrelevant, and exposed. They may lash out, withdraw, or attempt to reassert dominance, but deep down they know the truth. Once your boundaries become non-negotiable, their control begins to die quietly in the background. And what makes it even more devastating is that you didn't attack them. You simply protected yourself. That's the one move they never expect, and the one they can't defend against. The third sign, the moment you stop thinking emotionally and begin thinking long-term, dismantles a narcissist's control more quietly and more effectively than almost anything else. Narcissists rely on immediacy. They operate in short cycles, create chaos, provoke emotion, gain control, reset. Every tactic they use, love bombing, guilt trips, manufactured crises, silent treatments, depends on your emotional reflexes. They need you reacting quickly, impulsively, without stopping to analyze the pattern. The second you shift into strategic thinking instead of emotional responding, the dynamic flips completely. Their entire manipulation system depends on your short-term emotional vulnerability, not your long-term clarity. When you begin thinking long-term, you become harder to influence because you're prioritizing your future over their momentary approval. You're no longer making decisions based on how they feel right now. You're evaluating outcomes, patterns, consequences, and what your life will look like months or years from now. This makes you unpredictable in the best possible way. They can't use urgency, pressure, or emotional explosions to force compliance because you're now operating on a wider timeline. You're choosing stability over drama, logic over fear, self-respect over temporary peace. A narcissist fears long-term thinkers because long-term thinking exposes the manipulation cycle. You start seeing that their apologies are not actually apologies, they are resets. Their affection is not genuine connection, it's maintenance of control. Their anger is not passion, it's a strategy. Once you observe the pattern, instead of participating in it emotionally, their influence dissolves. You're no longer pulled into the push and pull dynamic they create to keep you dependent. You begin to recognize that every high is followed by a low, every promise is followed by disappointment, every "I'll change" is followed by the same behavior as before. You start predicting them with uncomfortable accuracy, and predictability kills their power. This long-term perspective makes you less reactive and more focused. You start planning your responses instead of giving them emotional access. You withdraw the fuel they depend on because your mind is no longer operating inside their frame. You're thinking beyond the moment, beyond the manipulation, beyond the illusion they create. This shift is subtle, but it terrifies them because it means you're gaining autonomy. Emotional thinking keeps you trapped. Strategic thinking sets you free. They sense it. They feel the difference. They notice that their usual triggers don't land the same way. You take longer to respond. You're calmer. You ask better questions. You compare what they say to what they do. You no longer fall for the intensity of the moment. They realize you're no longer playing the emotional game, and the realization hits them like a malfunction in their operating system. Long-term thinking makes them irrelevant to your decision-making process. They no longer feel like the center of your emotional world. They're now one variable among many, and for someone who needs to be the only variable, that's devastating. This is how their ego starts to quietly crack. Not through confrontation, but through your shift into a mindset where their manipulation simply can't survive. The fourth sign, the moment you stop being impressed by them, strikes at the core of a narcissist's identity because their entire sense of superiority depends on external reinforcement. Narcissists build their self-worth like a hologram. It only exists when someone is watching. They need an audience, a believer, someone who reacts with admiration, surprise, fascination, or even intimidation. Your amazement is their fuel. Your validation is their oxygen. When you stop reacting to their self-praise, their exaggerated stories, their inflated achievements, or the carefully curated image they project, you break the illusion they've spent their entire life constructing. They expect you to be dazzled by their confidence, to feel small in comparison, to stay emotionally hooked by the idea that you are lucky just to have their attention. But the moment your eyes stop shining with admiration, something inside them starts to destabilize. They suddenly feel ordinary, unimportant, exposed. They rely on your reactions to make their fantasies feel real. Without your validation, they are left face to face with the truth they desperately avoid. Their ego is fragile, and their worth is built on perception, not substance. When you stop being impressed, you stop playing your role in their psychological theater. You're no longer clapping for their performance, no longer reacting to their exaggerations, no longer giving life to their stories. You look at them with neutrality, and this neutrality is like a silent earthquake. Narcissists can handle anger because anger is still engagement. They can handle tears because tears show emotional investment. But indifference is lethal to them. It tells them they're not as exceptional as they pretend to be. It tells them their charm doesn't land. It tells them their power is slipping. They begin to notice that you're not excited by their accomplishments or intimidated by their supposed superiority or mesmerized by their theatrics. You're just steady. calm, unmoved, and that stability confronts them with a reality they cannot tolerate. They may double down on bragging, magnify their stories, or create drama to recapture your attention. They might even accuse you of being distant, cold, or ungrateful. But deep down, the panic is growing. Your lack of admiration exposes the truth they hide from everyone, including themselves. Everything they brag about becomes meaningless the moment it no longer affects you. And this is the quiet destruction they never see coming. You're not insulting them. You're not arguing with them. You're simply no longer impressed by the smoke and mirrors. You've detached your sense of worth from their opinions. You're seeing the difference between their image and their reality. And once that difference becomes clear, their ability to dominate the emotional space around you collapses. What they fear most is that you finally see them accurately, because once you do, their power disappears. And when you stop being impressed, you stop feeding the illusion that keeps their ego alive. The fifth sign, the moment your life begins improving without them, delivers a level of ego damage a narcissist cannot mentally or emotionally process, because it dismantles the central illusion they depend on, the belief that you need them to function. Narcissists live inside a story where they imagine themselves as the essential source of your stability, your success, your confidence, your emotional direction. They want to believe that without their presence, whether it's their attention, their approval, their criticism, or even their chaos, you would fall apart or stay stagnant. So when you begin to grow, evolve, and elevate your life in ways that do not include them, something inside them fractures deeply. Your progress becomes a threat because it contradicts their internal narrative. When you make better decisions, improve your habits, choose healthier relationships, focus on your goals, or simply look happier and more at peace, you challenge their entire sense of superiority. They depend on feeling above you, ahead of you, or somehow more important than you. Your growth removes them from the center of the equation. It shows them that their presence was never the reason you stood, and their absence is not the reason you rise. This realization is humiliating for them, even if they never say it aloud. To a narcissist, your improvement without them is not seen as normal personal development. It is seen as betrayal. In their mind, you were supposed to stay emotionally dependent, confused, insecure, or at least connected to their influence. When you detach and simultaneously grow, they experience something close to psychological freefall. It feels like you're rewriting the script, and they no longer have a role in it. They see you leveling up, and it confronts them with the reality that they were never the driving force behind your strength. Your evolution exposes the truth they work hard to hide. You were the strong one all along, and their control was only effective because you didn't know your power yet. Your improvement also removes the leverage they once had. If they thought you needed financial support, emotional validation, or guidance, your independence destroys that illusion. If they believed you would chase them, fall apart over them, or collapse without their approval, your stability contradicts everything they relied on. Your progress becomes living evidence that their importance was always exaggerated in their mind. And that kind of evidence is something their ego cannot tolerate. This is why many narcissists try to sabotage your growth, discredit your success, or downplay your achievements. They feel threatened by anything that places you above the version of yourself they preferred, dependent, uncertain, manageable. But the more you grow, the more powerless they become. Your life moving forward is the ultimate form of silent revenge because it exposes them without confrontation, without argument, without dramatic exits. What destroys them most is not that you left, but that you rose. Your improvement without them is proof that they were never the architect of your life. They were only a temporary detour. And nothing crushes a narcissistic ego faster than realizing you became stronger the moment they lost access to you. Silence is one of the few things a narcissist cannot manipulate, cannot argue with, and cannot decode. It becomes a mirror they are forced to look into, and what they see inside that mirror is the part of themselves they spend their whole lives avoiding. When you shift from emotional responses to intentional silence, you're not just ignoring them, you're interrupting the entire fuel system they depend on. They need reaction, engagement, conversation, conflict, praise, panic, confusion, anything that confirms they still have emotional access to you. Silence denies them all of it at once. To a narcissist, silence is not neutral. It's threatening. It makes them wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, and what you've realized. Narcissists fear the unknown because the unknown means they are no longer in control of your emotional landscape. Your silence becomes a psychological void they try desperately to fill. They may escalate, poke, provoke, or suddenly become overly attentive. Anything to break the quiet and regain emotional influence. They can handle shouting because shouting means you still care. They can handle crying because crying means they still matter. They can handle arguments because arguments mean you're still giving them energy. But silence? Silence means they've lost the ability to shape your responses. Your silence forces them to confront something they avoid more aggressively than responsibility: insignificance. When you stop explaining yourself, stop defending yourself, stop proving your point, stop reacting to their jabs, and stop participating in their emotional games, they experience a type of internal collapse. They begin replaying old conversations, reanalyzing their tactics, obsessing over where the control slipped. They interpret your silence as judgment, rejection, punishment, or abandonment. In their world, silence is never just silence, it's power. This psychological pressure builds because they can't predict you anymore. They don't know what you feel or whether you still care. They don't know if you're pulling away permanently or just observing them. They don't know whether you figured them out. And that uncertainty is torture for someone who survives by reading and controlling the emotional signals of others. What destroys them quietly is the realization that your silence comes from clarity, not confusion. It means you're no longer playing the game, no longer seeking approval, no longer defending your value, no longer emotionally available for manipulation. Your silence shows emotional independence, and emotional independence is fatal to their control. The more calm and grounded your silence becomes, the louder it echoes in their mind. They start spiraling internally, projecting fears, imagining threats, and trying to regain access to your emotions. But the damage is already happening. Your silence exposes their dependency on your reactions, their reliance on your attention, and their inability to function when they can no longer extract emotional energy from you. In the end, your silence isn't an attack, it's a boundary. But to a narcissist, a boundary feels like a battlefield they're losing. And nothing destroys their ego faster than the realization that the one thing they cannot overpower is the calm strength you found within yourself. A narcissist's entire identity depends on one fragile belief: that they are above you, not equal, not beside you, above. Their superiority is not earned through genuine confidence or real achievements. It's constructed out of comparison, illusion, and emotional domination. They need to feel taller by keeping you smaller. So when you begin growing mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually, socially, your growth disrupts the one structure they rely on to maintain their inflated self-image. Your evolution becomes a direct challenge to the pedestal they built for themselves. You're no longer playing the role they assigned you, the dependent one, the insecure one, the grateful one, the confused one, the one who needs guidance or approval. Your growth dismantles the narrative that they are the more capable, more intelligent, more desirable, or more powerful person in the dynamic. And when that narrative breaks, their ego cracks with it. Narcissists don't view your progress as normal development. They view it as rebellion. They feel threatened by your improvement because it suggests you're stepping into a world where they don't automatically outrank you. They may try to dismiss your growth, mock it, minimize it, or pretend it doesn't matter. But beneath the surface, they're panicking. Every new skill you learn, every boundary you set, every emotional breakthrough you achieve, every moment of confidence you display, these become reminders that the balance of power is shifting. Your growth highlights their stagnation. Narcissists rarely evolve because evolution requires self-awareness, humility, accountability, and the willingness to challenge their own patterns, all things they avoid at all costs. So when you begin growing, it forces a comparison they cannot escape. You start accelerating while they stay stuck. You start understanding yourself while they remain disconnected from their own reality. You begin rising and they begin shrinking, not because your growth harms them, but because it exposes what they never worked on within themselves. This is why many narcissists sabotage the growth of others. They'll question your decisions, plant doubt, create distractions, criticize your goals, or demand emotional labor just when you start focusing on yourself. Your growth threatens their sense of superiority, so they try to pull you back down into the version of yourself they can dominate. But once you outgrow the emotional level where their manipulation thrives, they can no longer attach themselves to you the same way. Growth is independence. Growth is clarity. Growth is self-trust. Growth means you no longer rely on them to define your worth or shape your identity. And that independence is devastating to a narcissist because it means you've crossed into a space where they can't follow. Not because they lack access, but because they lack the internal depth to stand beside you. When you rise, their illusion of superiority collapses. Your growth doesn't destroy them directly. Your growth forces them to face the truth. They were only powerful when you didn't know your own strength. One of the most devastating blows you can deliver to a narcissist is the simple truth that you no longer need them. Narcissists construct their entire sense of importance around being indispensable. They need to believe that without their presence, their guidance, their attention, or even their chaos, you would struggle, falter, or lose direction. Their sense of control and superiority thrives on your dependency. When you step out of that dependency and prove that your life functions, thrives, and even flourishes without them, you hit the core of their fragile ego. This realization is more lethal than confrontation, more destabilizing than argument, and more terrifying than rejection. They cannot comprehend a world where they are irrelevant because their identity is built on the illusion that they are central. Every manipulative tactic they've ever used, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, love bombing, intimidation, depends on keeping you in a state of subtle reliance. The moment you remove that reliance, you remove the scaffolding that holds up their self-worth. A narcissist experiences this like a slow implosion. They start to notice the small changes first. You making decisions without consulting them, achieving goals without their input, or simply moving forward without waiting for their approval. To an outside observer, these may seem ordinary or healthy, but to a narcissist, it's catastrophic. Every independent choice you make is a signal that their role as the essential figure in your life is shrinking. They may try to assert themselves more aggressively, escalate control, or manufacture drama, but deep down they know that their influence is slipping. Their sense of indispensability is directly tied to their ego's survival. When you no longer rely on them for validation, support, or emotional regulation, they are forced to confront a reality they avoid at all costs: that they were never the architect of your happiness or success. This confrontation is not gradual. It's a psychological shockwave that reverberates through their self-image. They begin replaying scenarios, questioning their relevance, and obsessing over the fact that their presence no longer dictates your behavior. Your independence also exposes their insecurities. If they could no longer be essential, then all their previous strategies for control were essentially meaningless. They are left facing the emptiness they've hidden behind charm, manipulation, and superiority. Nothing you say or do needs to attack them directly. The mere act of thriving without their influence dismantles their constructed reality. By living fully without them, you are demonstrating that their perceived importance was only ever a reflection of your tolerance, patience, or unawareness. And narcissists cannot psychologically process being unnecessary. It is the ultimate form of silent disruption, the final sign that you have reclaimed control over your life. When they realize they are no longer essential, their ego doesn't just bruise. It quietly collapses under the weight of its own dependence on you. In the end, what you need to understand is simple but profound. A narcissist's power exists only as long as you give it to them. Every emotional reaction, every boundary you compromise, every moment you allow them to define your worth feeds the illusion they live on. But the moment you detach, the moment you set unbreakable boundaries, the moment you think long-term, stop being impressed, grow beyond them, and thrive without their presence, everything changes. You don't have to confront them loudly, manipulate them back, or fight for recognition. Your strength, your independence, and your clarity do the work silently. What feels like calmness or indifference to you is actually seismic to them. It shakes their ego, exposes their fragility, and slowly dismantles the control they thought they had. You don't destroy them out of malice. You destroy the system they built to dominate you by simply living your truth. And that is the ultimate victory, not in revenge, not in drama, but in reclaiming your power, your peace, and your life. When you stop being a source of their control, their ego quietly collapses and you are free. The most powerful action you can take isn't to attack. It's to become unshakable, unstoppable, and unapologetically yourself.